Hello and welcome to WSOU Sports's, I guess this is our first annual 2021 NBA Finals preview show. We have an absolutely outstanding show lined out for you tonight, so be sure to stick with us. My name is Joe Matthews, and I'm joined alongside my two outstanding co-hosts, Jory Mickens and Jonathan Haidt. We'll be joined a little later on by our Bucks analyst, Michael Daly, and our Suns analyst, Ben Harris. But before we get into any of that, I've got to ask the most important question of the night, which is Jory, Jonathan, how are you guys doing?
I am doing fantastic, Joe. I'm so excited to talk with you guys about this year's finals. It's just kind of baffling that this is the actual finals. It's finally here, and it's two teams that I'm sure a lot of us were not expecting were going to be there. And there's a lot to talk about. I can't wait to talk about it with you guys.
Yeah, I'm doing just as good. I'm excited for Tuesday. It's going to be a wonderful series, I think, and I can't wait to get into it with you guys.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's absolutely going to be a really exciting series. But before we sort of really get into the preview of the Bucks Suns matchup, I kind of want to first do a little bit of reminiscing and sort of look back on the whole playoffs as they've happened so far. And there's a lot of really great series, some outstanding moments and games and performances, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit. So I'll open that up. I mean, any of you guys, what was like your favorite just overall moment or game from this past playoffs you've seen so far?
For me, I guess I'll go with like my Homer team moment first as a Knicks fan. Just seeing them win at least one playoff game for basically like the first time that I can remember. Just seeing them finally, even though they lost the series, but just winning at MSG, just the atmosphere of that, it was just electric. And I just think this year's playoffs of having some of these bigger market teams finally back and making things just more, more prevalent for a lot of the fans around the league. You had the Sixers, the Knicks, the Nets, the Lakers, the Clippers, all the big cities around the NBA that are part of the fan bases and makes it, I feel like if the Knicks are good, the Nets are good, I think NBA as a whole is better. That was certainly prevalent this year's playoffs, just seeing kind of that dynamic of just some teams here and there, like we're talking about the Suns and the Bucks, who two teams certainly not expecting to be in the position they're in now to be here. But there were so many great moments. I just wish, and we're going to talk about this later too, Joe, that if the injury bug did not bite about half the NBA superstars, just that's going to be a big what if, I think, for the next almost decade. Just thinking about if some of these players like LeBron, Kawhi Leonard, just off the top of my head, if they were healthy, what it would have been like. But overall, this year's playoffs, I think, was one of the best in years, regardless.
Hey, if we're going with Homer picks, I have to pick my team, the Denver Nuggets. I mean, they obviously got wiped out in 4 games against the eventual Western Conference champion Phoenix Suns in the second round, but I really enjoyed their series against the Blazers, especially Game 5, where Damian Lillard just went absolutely ballistic, scoring 55 points in that game. I believe he also hit 12 threes. I mean, me watching that fan, I mean, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack at one point. I mean, he just couldn't miss. But it was really one of the best games I had ever seen between any two teams. And I guess, Joe, you'll appreciate this. The Brooklyn Nets. I mean, watching Kevin Durant, especially in that series against the Bucks, I mean, that was just a special performance from him. Everything considered, with all the injuries they dealt with, the fact that he stepped up and was still carrying that team at the rate he was, I mean, that was really a special thing to watch. So, I mean, the superstars were in full effect this postseason. We still have plenty of superstars left, and on the Bucks and Suns, the NBA Finals is very, it's full of superstars. It's going to be so much fun. But this postseason has been one for the ages, despite all the injuries that the NBA has dealt with this year. It's been a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you brought it up there, Jordan. I mean, I'm gonna have to triple down too with my favorite moment on going Homer picks and the Brooklyn Nets and that. I mean, you said it best. I mean, that series by Kevin Durant performance he put on was just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, and even though the Nets didn't pull it out and they, like your Nuggets story, lost to the eventual conference champions in the Bucks in the East, uh, even though the Nets lost the series, it still was an overall. I mean, it wasn't as upsetting as you'd think it would normally be to see your team lose in a playoff series like that. Because I mean, for the Nets from the perspective of a Nets fan, I mean, they've been in the gutter for so long. And I mean, the ages of, the potential franchise superstars and bright future players were Sean Kilpatrick and Markel Brown. And to go from watching them to seeing Kevin Durant drop a 50-piece in the playoffs in overtime and, hit that huge, almost was a game-winning three, game-tying shot to send it to overtime in Game 7, hitting that buzzer-beating shot clock, beating the shot clock at the buzzer shot in the end of Game 5. I mean, it was just really awesome and surreal to watch. And so, that's the biggest takeaway I have from this playoff series is that for me, a great memory that I'll always remember down the road, even though it wasn't the ending that a Nets fan wanted. That to see that series and the performance by Durant was outstanding. And I mean, same thing. The rest of this entire playoffs, has just been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the Dame 55 piece, the Trae Young versus New York Knicks saga, that was awesome to watch. I mean, it's been an outstanding playoffs. And it's blown my expectations away. I'm sure it's blown you guys' expectations away as well. But moving on from sort of still kind of reminiscing a little bit and talking more about the playoffs as a whole in the bigger picture. You guys both touched on it a little bit a couple of minutes ago, which is the injuries that, the injury bug was running rampant throughout the NBA throughout this playoff series. Guys like James Harden, Anthony Davis, Kemba Walker. I mean, you could list literally 10 or 15 superstars that had some sort of injury or ailment throughout this playoff series. And so I kind of want to ask, do you think that, there's been a lot of rumors that it could be attributed to the sort of shortened off season coming off of, the bubble season and, teams like the Lakers were playing all the way up through to the finals. And then they had a real short turnaround. And then guys like LeBron and Anthony Davis couldn't really stay healthy. Do you think that is really the prime reason for all these injuries? And if so, I mean, do you think that there's a way that the NBA can sort of handle this turnover from this season to the next season differently to kind of prevent that from happening in the future?
It's a really good question, Joe. And it's obviously kind of like a touchy subject just because there's been players like LeBron who have been so outspoken about the NBA's handling of, obviously they had the bubble in Orlando and the way it all played out, it was a success because they were able to pull off an NBA playoffs under just unbelievable circumstances. But I think it definitely 100% is going to be attributed to that short turnaround time. Another reason why the Lakers couldn't properly rehab what they do in the offseason and recover. But I just think everything in general for this season, and even not just in the NBA, but all the sports, it's just with everything in COVID, just how it's all correlating. It just every single day is a new mystery. Even seeing Chris Paul miss some time in the playoffs due to health and safety protocols. I think he actually tested positive for COVID. I just think just the reality of today's world and just how uncertain it is with COVID definitely has played a part in just players staying healthy. I know the morale of most players has been down, not only in the NBA, but in college, just because you're isolated a lot from your family, to stay with your team. So back before, especially the vaccines were rolled out, that was all they really could do to really contain the spread of the virus, to really still pull off games. So I just think there's a bunch of factors contributing to it, but I think the pandemic obviously is the most reasonable explanation for that. And I'm sure we'll always kind of, like I said before, wonder if the injury bug did not happen in this year's playoffs, would the Lakers be back? Would it be Lakers versus Nets like we thought? A lot of us were predicting that before the playoffs began, but I just think there's so many questions that are going to be left unanswered because of that. But again, COVID, I think definitely played a large role in everything going down this year.
I'm personally 50-50 on this subject. I think that definitely you have to acknowledge that these teams had shortened off seasons, right? You have teams like the Lakers, like Jonathan mentioned, and a team like the Nuggets who also had a pretty short off season. But at the same time, injuries happen every year. And I feel like NBA fans right now are kind of clouded by recency bias, or at least their judgment, and they're kind of just forgetting how some other teams have made deep runs in the playoffs because they got lucky with opponents' injuries. And you have to take the injuries also at a case-by-case basis. I don't think we're doing that either. I don't think Chris Paul's shoulder injury, where he just it was a really weird incident where he just ran into his teammate essentially in the first round. I don't know if you can necessarily attribute that to a shortened offseason. That's just a freak accident. Same thing with Giannis's, hyperextension knee injury. Like, if he doesn't land, I think it was Clint Capella, and like in that vicinity, maybe that doesn't happen. Like, I feel like a lot of some of these injuries are just it's just part of the game. Others are definitely more wear and tear injuries, but I mean, it's been a pretty terrible season overall. But at the same time, I feel like it's not too different as what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of fall a little bit more like I agree with what you were saying, Jory, that, it is kind of a 50-50 in a case by case basis thing because, like for example, with the Lakers, I think that honestly is probably a big time, just turn around. LeBron didn't have his normal off season to recover and everything. Anthony Davis was, just struggling with staying healthy and getting enough rest all year. But I mean, like you said, case by case basis, some of those things, I think it's just a mix of there are a lot of sort of freak injuries and then maybe a couple that could be contributed to the whole offseason thing, which sort of makes the bigger picture look all, jumbled and messed up. I mean, like, someone like from the Nets perspective, Kyrie Irving, people were calling him out and, saying, oh, Kyrie's, again, he's injury prone when it comes to the playoffs. The Nets didn't rest their stars enough, blah, 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 blah. But like the Kyrie Irving injury, he just had an awkward fall and got lucky and hit Giannis's foot on the way down from a layup. And that's not if he load managed an extra 10 games in the season, that's not going to prevent his, ankle from getting sprained. So I do think that it's maybe a little overblown with the whole, off-season turnaround thing, but I still think there was definitely a bit of a factor for more teams more than others. I mean, like there was heading into the playoffs, the 4 teams that were the conference finalists in the previous season. I mean, 3 of them were kind of underperforming teams a little bit. And, I think it was the Nuggets was the only team that actually, won their first round series. So, I mean, I think that, and I know you'll like that. You like that fact, Jory. So, I think that did definitely play a factor. But I mean, just like you said, Jory, with every NBA season, there's certain little, tangles and road bumps in the road along the way to getting a championship. And I mean, that's what we've seen. That the team like the Nets with their roster was so stacked and there's no way they're going to lose. Well, I mean, things just didn't pan out for them. And the Lakers, that was LeBron and Anthony Davis. How can you beat them? They're the defending champions. Well, but didn't turn out the way they hoped. And teams like the Bucks and the Suns, who some people might have written off, and some people might have picked the Suns to lose their first round series against the Lakers. They're in the finals and they're going to be competing for a ring. So it's going to be real exciting to see. And just one more question before we bring on our Bucks analyst, Michael Daly. As I just said there, some people, had a little bit of wrong picks in the first round, and some people might have picked the Lakers to go to the finals, to beat the Suns, etc. And so I want to kind of revisit everyone's pre-playoff finals prediction sort of takes. And we did do a NBA playoff preview show here just a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, time's flying by. That, I mean, it feels like that was just yesterday. But I know we made some predictions for what we thought the finals matchup was going to be and who the champions were. And I mean, I know mine did absolutely not pan out the way that I predicted. So can you guys just like revisit your takes? And I mean, what do you think? What do you think about them looking back on it?
Yeah, I think all of our takes from that show, I think there were a lot of things that we just couldn't forecast, like we've been talking about. If I remember correctly, and I could be wrong with my my Eastern Conference team, but I think I had the Jazz making it to the finals, which I think was a very plausible pick. But obviously, like we saw, they just, couldn't handle the Suns after a while. But I think I might have chose the Sixers in the East. I think I just chose the 2-1 seeds because I was sold on them during the regular season. And I did not think Ben Simmons would absolutely just implode offensively like that, because I knew obviously he wasn't a great playoff player to begin with, but I don't think anyone could have predicted that he'd pass up like wide open dunks and layups by the end of the series against the Hawks. But there was just so many things that we could not forecast from this year. And I know a lot of people, again, picked the Lakers and Nets. That was a big one, I remember. And you couldn't put it any better before, Joe. Just the fact that no matter how many superstars or how much talent or coaching or anything you might have, I mean, we're all human. Things can happen. Injuries can happen. Things beyond your control can happen. And that's exactly what happened to many of the top NBA teams this year. I mean, the Sixers, think about it. If Ben Simmons played to his potential, they could be in this spot right now, not the Bucks. The Jazz, they're still like, Donovan Mitchell is a star, but they're still like, growing him and Gobert together. And maybe in a year or two, they'll be even better. Obviously, they were the 1 seed this year, but even more playoff experience beyond their belt besides just the 2 seasons. There's so many factors in play. But again, we could not have predicted what actually did happen this year by a long shot.
Well, for me, I don't know if I necessarily made like a concrete NBA Finals prediction, but I remember at least one thing that I did say before the playoffs started. The winner of a potential Bucks Brooklyn Nets series would win the NBA Finals. That's what I said, I think, before the postseason even began. And I mean, we're here now. The Bucks are still standing. I'm foreshadowing a little bit, maybe too much, but you'll have to see if I change my prediction by the end of this show. I don't know. I just feel like those 2 teams were the best teams at full strength, heading into the playoffs. Obviously, the Lakers were dealing with some injuries, so I didn't have a lot of faith in them. But, the fully strength Bucks and fully strength Nets, those were, in my opinion, the 2 best teams in the NBA. And Suns, I don't know. I don't think I even had them beating the Lakers in round 1. So the fact that they made it all the way to this point is pretty remarkable. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a really fun series, and I can't wait to, again, get into it with you guys.
Yeah, and I mean, looking back on my predictions, my finals prediction, I did pick the Nets to go all the way and win the championship, and I picked them over the Nuggets actually. So I was anticipating a me versus Drury type, our teams two going up against each other in the finals. That didn't pan out. I mean, I was a huge believer in the Nuggets actually. I felt with the way Nikola Jokic played this year and winning the MVP and the guys around him, Michael Porter Jr., the way he sort of stepped up down the stretch when Jamal Murray came out, he had that absolutely outrageous first quarter, and I think it was against the Blazers in the playoff series where he had about 18 points and 6 threes. I just thought that, the Nuggets were going to step up and just, Jokic and Porter and, Aaron Gordon coming in at the trade deadline. I thought they were just going to catch fire at the right time and just make it out of the West. That didn't happen, obviously, unfortunately. And the Nets, too. I mean, I picked them. And I will say, I did say on our playoff show that, I was absolutely 99% confident that the Nets were going to win the finals. And the only thing I said that could stop the Nets from winning the finals would be the health of the players. And if one of the superstars go down, and 2 of the superstars went down. So that obviously did not pan out the way I hoped. And actually, thinking about how you had said, Jory, you said that the Bucks and Nets, the winner of a potential series of that, you picked to be your NBA champion. I actually just think that just awoke a take that I remember I actually did make, which was back in the beginning of the playoffs. And I said that the winner of the Hawks-Knicks series was going to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. And the Hawks actually did do that. I was not a believer at all in the Sixers. And so, whether the Knicks or the Hawks took that series, I had confidence in them sort of taking down the behemoth 1 seed Sixers. And the Hawks did do that. And they obviously came up short to the Bucks, who are now going to be playing in the NBA Finals. And, I think it's time now that we actually start talking about the NBA Finals coming up, because that's what this show is about. It's enough reminiscing. We're going to get into it. I mean, everything you need to know from both sides, both teams, the Bucks and the Suns, our predictions for what's going to happen, players to watch for, names to watch, storylines to watch. It's going to be a great, great level of analysis from everyone we have on this show, including our first guest, who will be joining us now to break down the Bucks. He is a man who needs no introduction. He's a staple on these shows, and he is the resident Bucks expert here at WSOU Sports. It is none other than Michael Daly. How you doing tonight, man?
What's up, guys? Good to see everybody.
It's good to see you too, Michael. You look handsome as ever.
Same to you, buddy.
Awesome to have you, Michael. And it's okay with everyone. I'm going to ask Michael the first question just because I remember just from our past shows, Michael, just some of the takes you've had for the Bucks have been so accurate. And obviously it was so hard to forecast that the Bucks would be in the position they're in right now. But there's just kind of an elephant in the room question I want to lead off with just because it's been circling my mind. Obviously, we do not know if Giannis is healthy enough to play in game 1 yet because of that injury with the hyperextended knee and everything. And obviously the Bucks had to win some games without him, and that they did. You had some other players stepping up, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, etc. But my first question to you is, out of all of Giannis's supporting cast, who do you think is the number one most important player that has to play to their potential in order for the Bucks to win the championship?
I would say that it is Drew Holiday, because this is the one year where the Milwaukee Bucks have had a point guard that they can actually go to. They've had Chris Middleton in the past, and I always said that Chris Middleton is the perfect number 2 guy, because is he the leader of a team? No, but he's expected to play well. Drew Holiday, he's a player that I think is an elevated level over Eric Bledsoe and a few other point guards that the Milwaukee Bucks have had in the past. I think he will have to play at a high level, just like he did with Atlanta, because who knows when or if Giannis is going to play in this series at all. Things are looking optimistic that he will play, but he can't do it alone, even if he is coming back, because there is no such thing as 100%. Even if you're a healthy person, so to speak, you're not 100% through the course of a season and a postseason. So I think having a point guard with a lot of playoff experience, that's something not too many people know about Drew Holiday. He's been in the playoffs before. So I think at this moment in time, yes, this is the biggest stage of Drew Holiday's career, as well as everyone else on the Bucks. I think if he can step up and really facilitate the offense, that will help out Giannis and the Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess to bounce off of what Michael was saying, I think I agree completely. I think it's really Drew Holiday has got to step up. I mean, we saw in games 5 and 6, obviously, of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Atlanta Hawks, Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday really stepped up. Middleton averaging 29 points per game in those 2 games, and then Holiday averaging 26. Again, if Giannis isn't 100%, which I really doubt he will be, it's tough to recover from a hyperextended knee that quickly. It's really going to be incumbent on Middleton and Holiday to carry the load offensively as Giannis kind of regains his form. And like you said, Holiday's two-way impact, his experience just in the NBA in general, it's going to be an integral part to Milwaukee's success in this series.
Absolutely. Because one thing Milwaukee has been good at for the past few years, and I think part of it is because of Giannis and also Mike Budenholzer, is their defense. They're a lockdown, shutdown defensive team. It helps having someone like Brook Lopez, and it also helps having another big in Bobby Portis, who's been getting a lot of minutes too. Defensively, he's helped out. But Drew Holiday, I've said this ad nauseum at this point, he can guard most teams 1 to 3, even 1 to 4, a lot of power forwards. You can stick him on and he'll do a decent job as well. I think in this series, Drew Holiday will be important because they have to figure out a way when Chris Paul's off the floor. How do you have an answer for Cameron Payne? Because Cameron Payne, he was a problem for the Clippers to solve. He caused a lot of issues in relief. And I think it got to a point the Clippers were actually relieved to see Chris Paul because, like, all right, we've had enough of this guy. Let's get back to Chris Paul. I don't, at least if you're the Bucks, I don't think the Bucks want to be at a point where Cameron Payne is too much to handle and Chris Paul is a relief to see and a joy. I don't think that will happen because, one, I think Drew Holiday is better than Patrick Beverley is defensively. I know some may disagree with that, but I think Drew Holiday might be the best defensive guard in the NBA. And I think whether you put Drew Holiday on Chris Paul, Cameron Payne, Devin Booker, whomever you put him on, I think he will shut them down. Also, PJ Tucker, too. PJ Tucker is another player, defensively speaking, who's helped this team out tremendously. Is he the greatest offensive player? No. But he's one of those guys, you put him in the game, I think he secures your lineup.
No, I mean, the ability that the Bucks have to have guys like Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, who, I mean, Drew is honestly kind of a proven performer in the NBA. He's been around for a really long time. And Chris Middleton, I mean, we've seen him this playoff step up and just go absolutely ballistic. And I mean, from the perspective of a Nets fan and facing the Bucks in that 7-game series, it was honestly, I don't know if it's a hot take or what you would call it, but I mean, even though Giannis is, the 2-time MVP and the best player on the team by far, no doubt, I was honestly terrified of Chris Middleton more going up against the Bucks, because that's a guy who has the ability to just rip off a 21-0 run in the span of 3 minutes by himself. And so, like you said, Michael, I mean, to see those guys step up, it's going to be a big key, I think, to whether or not the Bucks can pull off this championship run or not. But before we get a little bit further into the analysis for the upcoming series, I kind of want to look back a little bit on the playoff run they've had so far. And you brought the name up in one of your previous answers, and it's Mike Budenholzer. And I remember back on our playoff preview show, I had asked you about your thoughts on Mike Budenholzer a little bit. And throughout this playoff run, I mean, I feel like it's kind of been up and down. You know, there was that time, you know, after game 2 against the Nets, and the Bucks had lost by 40, and, you know, it seemed like the Bucks season might be somewhat over. And you started to hear, you know, the calls for his head. All right, maybe it's time for the Bucks to move on from Coach Bud. But I mean, they surged back and came back, and now they're in the NBA Finals. So what have you seen from Bud this postseason? I mean, that he's A, done well to be able to coach this team all the way to the finals, and B, do you think that they should just stick with him regardless of how the series pans out?
I have been surprised. And Coach Budenholzer was a coach that, one, I didn't really want. I thought the way the Bucks handled the Jason Kidd situation, I don't think was great in 2018. I honestly thought his interim coach that replaced him should have been the coach of the future, but that didn't happen. Coach Budenholzer took over. At the start of the playoffs, I thought that it was going to be the same old Bucks. I'll be quite honest with you. With the way game 1 of the Heat series happened, the Heat almost won that game. That's something a lot of people forget about. And Chris Middleton closed that game out. But Coach Budenholzer made a few calls in that first game that were a little questionable down the stretch. The Bucks were able to put it together because I think it helped that it was at home. There was a crowd. And I think the Bucks just were a better team than the Heat in that series. Once they got past the Heat, I think his job was secure for the long haul, regardless of what happened to Brooklyn. And here's why, guys. Because if the Nets were healthy, let's be honest, the Nets would be in the finals right now. They would have beaten the Bucks, and they would have beaten either the Sixers or the Hawks. Let's just say the Hawks. They would have beaten the Hawks. So I think all Coach Budenholzer had to do was get past the Heat, because last year you couldn't. This year you're the higher seed again, and you still can't. That's a problem. But he was able to. The Nets series, though, I'm never one that wants to call for anyone's job. I don't like doing that. I think it's disrespectful to call for someone's job, because although Coach Budenholzer is a millionaire and probably doesn't need the money, he still has a family, I'm sure, and he has a home in Wisconsin. So now you have to uproot him. There are a lot of complications that go into firing someone, as opposed to just saying, oh, let's get rid of this guy, because there's a human element to it that we have to remember. But with Coach Budenholzer, the way he was able to respond, and honestly, you brought up the 40-point game. I'm going to bring up game 5. You're up by 17 points. You blow that lead. Everyone thought it's over. Series is over. The Bucks are done. But no, they weren't. They were able to survive, and I think that shocked the heck out of a lot of people. And I'm going to put a lot of, maybe responsibility is not the right word, but credit to Mike Budenholzer, because you can give it to the players all you want, but schematically it's about the coach and the head coach. The buck stops there, and it did with Mike Budenholzer.
Yeah, Mike, I like what a lot of you said about Mike Budenholzer, and there's obviously been times in the playoffs where the adjustments just haven't been there, and other times it has been. It's just been inconsistent. But the most important thing for any NBA front office is the fact that, okay, the Bucks are in the finals. So obviously, like you said, after the Heat series, which I think is a good take, his job would have been secure, and just being able to make it that far, because obviously the Bucks have been struggling for years to finally make it to the finals, and this was the year. So I don't see them, re-changing their decision anytime soon with him. But on the topic that Joe brought up, almost like reminiscing the Bucks playoff run, I kind of have a question that's based off something you said before, where you said obviously Mike Budenholzer's job was basically secured after getting revenge against the Heat. And if you look at the Bucks playoff run as a whole, okay, you sweep the Heat, who beat you last year in the playoffs. You beat the Nets in 7. You beat the Hawks in 6. So 3 of the biggest series wins, I think, in franchise history, of being able to beat 3 very good teams. And obviously the Nets were not at full strength, but still being able to beat Kevin Durant in the end. And obviously being the red hot Hawks, just finally stopping Trae Young, who again was hurt with the injury bug, but still was able to play by the end of the series. So my question to you is, out of those 3 series, which of the 3 do you think is the most important when you talk about the Bucks' success in the playoffs? And what's the one, if you're the Phoenix Suns, you're going to look back when you're studying film of the Bucks to prepare for them, that you think is the best interpretation of the Milwaukee Bucks?
I would say the Brooklyn Nets series is probably their best series because that was the most difficult. No one thought the Milwaukee Bucks were going to be able to defeat the Brooklyn Nets because at the start of the series, the Nets were full staffed. They had a healthy Kyrie Irving, KD, and James Harden was close to 100%. But once they got past that series, even without Kyrie, they barely won. If it hadn't been for Kevin Durant's size 18 shoe or whatever he garners, the Nets probably would have won that series with that shot he made, but his foot was on the line, and that changed everything. That just goes to show how basketball can change in an instant. There's no guarantee in the game of basketball, and it showed with the Bucks. But I think it was a little bit of the luck of the draw, but the Bucks, the way they were able to play, the Brooklyn Nets series, that was their toughest test. I honestly think it'll be more challenging than the Hawks were and the Suns. And that's no disrespect to the Phoenix Suns, but if you're stacking up the Suns and the Nets, I don't think it's close. Yes, Chris Paul has led them a long way. Devin Booker is a star in the making. He's already a star, but I think he has another level to get to, which I think he will achieve. But the Nets, that semi-final series, I think either Jory or someone said it before I got on here, that was essentially the NBA Finals before the NBA Finals. That was going to decide who would be the champion. So that's honestly, Jonathan, why I think that was the most important series, because the Bucks were fully healthy too, for the most part. Aside from Dante Di Vincenzo, they were healthy. And one thing I want to hit on too with Mike Budenholzer, regardless of what happens in the NBA Finals, what he was able to do in this playoff run has not been done by too many coaches in the Bucks history. Larry Costello is one of those coaches in the 70s who was actually the last coach to bring them to the finals in 1974. But other than that, we've had coaches, or the Milwaukee Bucks rather, have had coaches who have brought them to the playoffs consistently but couldn't get over that hump. Mike Budenholzer, I thought, and a lot of people in the Bucks camp and fans thought he was going to be that coach, a good coach, but not great. But it turns out in these playoffs, he is a great coach.
Well, honestly, kind of just to go back a little bit, Michael, you mentioned one name, Dante Di Vincenzo. We were kind of talking about that Heat series a little bit. He went down in game 3 of that series, so he has been out for basically the entirety of this postseason run for the Bucks. Are you at all surprised that Milwaukee has made it this far without their starting shooting guard from the regular season?
I'm not surprised that we got this far because of him, because I knew if he went down or when he went down, someone like Bryn Forbes would be able to help. We could kind of change up the lineup a bit, add PJ Tucker in, maybe have Bobby Portis come at the 4. There are different alterations that the lineups I knew would happen because the Bucks do have a very deep lineup. That is one thing that everyone talks about, especially last year and this year. The healthiest team will win it all, which is true. I agree with that, but I also think the team with the most depth will win as well. And I think the Milwaukee Bucks, because Dante Di Vincenzo went down in the first round of the playoffs, it was next man up. Bryn Forbes played well. I have been really impressed with the way he's been able to shoot behind the arc. That's something I didn't really notice too much from him in San Antonio. I thought he was more of a dribble driver and he would try to get to the rack. But now, though, he would spot up and get his shots down. And that's important because that's kind of similar to what Dante Di Vincenzo would do a lot as well. But Di Vincenzo, an athletic guard, it obviously hurts missing him. But to answer your question, Jory, I didn't think that it was that big of an impact, even though he was the starter. Whereas when Giannis went down, it was like the world ended for the Bucks.
Yeah, just like you said, just great. I'm speechless, Michael Daly. Outstanding analysis. But I want to look forward again a little bit more towards that Bucks Suns series that we have coming up, the finals, the big,
Mhm.
Larry O'Brien. And you touched on it a little bit. I know you talked about, shutting down Cameron Payne, things like that. But what do you think is the absolute prime number one key for the Bucks to win this series against the Suns?
All right. Actually, let me ask you a question. Is Giannis going to play or not? Or is he going to be healthy?
I'm gonna say if Giannis comes out and is from game 2 on, Giannis is playing and healthy. Game 1, he's the question mark. If he plays, he's not 100%, but game 2 on, he's good to go.
I think it's going to see how well he fits back into that lineup. And you may think it's not really that big of a deal. He's only been out 9 days because he was injured last Tuesday. But the thing is, this Bucks team won a playoff series without him. Let's not get that twisted. Yes, Giannis was there up until game 4, but they really had to do all of the heavy lifting after that. And if it hadn't been for the likes of Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday playing 40 minutes and really spelling Giannis's minutes, they wouldn't be here. So I think it's going to see how well Giannis is able to adjust, because there will be an adjustment period. That goes with everything. It happened to Chris Paul when he got back into the lineup, him reemerging into that starting role. But Giannis, he's the star of this team. Yes, Chris Middleton has played like a closer, which is like the trendy thing to call him now. And he can still be a closer with Giannis. He can definitely be, but I think it's a different angle that he'll play at now. Whereas the ball will be going through Giannis. And one thing that really interests me defensively, how will the Suns attack him? Will they bring a lot of pressure knowing that knee might not be 100% healthy? That could be something as well. And look, I'm not here to put any omens out there, but I do think the Bucks have to be mentally prepared if Giannis does re-injure this knee or cause another injury to his body. What is plan B through Z? That's what has to happen, because if the 2019 NBA Finals didn't teach anybody anything, it's that when someone's injured and they're coming back, you have to plan for the worst. Yes, you could plan for the best, but expect the worst, because look what happened with Kevin Durant. He was out all of 2019, 2020 after. Klay Thompson as well, out all of 2019 and 2020. And I think part of that injury led to his most recent injury last October. So that just goes to say you have to be very careful with Giannis, see how he fits into the lineup. And I think if Giannis fits well, the Bucks will be in good shape.
And Michael, I love all that analysis. I just want to ask you one more quick question from me before you head out for the night. And obviously, the big question throughout like the entire playoffs, and obviously in the finals alone, is who's going to be the NBA Finals MVP. And I feel like with this series, before we even get to your actual like pick of Bucks or Suns and whatever number of games, who's going to be, regardless of the team, who do you think will be the NBA Finals MVP, and who will be almost the catalyst that's going to be stealing the show and like probably the biggest platform that an NBA player can have in the NBA Finals?
Jonathan, I can't really say Finals MVP without giving my pick, because that's usually who gets it, the team that wins. But I'll say the best player, I think, is going to be Devin Booker. I think Devin Booker, in order for the Suns to win, I think he's going to have 30-plus point games. I think they will need that out of him. Chris Paul, I think, will have a tremendous series, but in terms of scoring, because I do think this is going to be a high-scoring series, I think Devin Booker will really have to show out. So I'm not tipping my hand, but I think the best player of the series will be Devin Booker. That may not mean the MVP, but I think it will be Devin Booker. Oh, did you guys want me to give my finals prediction yet, or because I wasn't sure if that was part of the question?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. You said finals prediction. Who do you think will win? How many games? How is the series going to pan out? Simple as that.
Putting my biases aside and being objective about it, I honestly think the Milwaukee Bucks, if Giannis is healthy and able to play from when he starts to play to the end of the series, I think the Bucks will win in 7 games, because the Phoenix Suns are a very well-rounded team. They're very good defensively, and having that veteran leadership of Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and also another name we haven't talked about yet, and I'm sure Ben will talk about it in just a few minutes, Jake Crowder. he's a guy who's been to back-to-back finals. So that will be crucial as well. But I honestly think the Bucks are going to win in 7. My finals MVP, to answer your question, Jonathan, because I didn't want to say it last time around because I feel like it would tip my hand. Since I'm picking the Bucks, I think it's going to be Chris Middleton, because Giannis might be the best player on the Bucks, but I think Chris Middleton, there's a reason why he played so well in the last series, because he's that talented. He's that good. He just hasn't been needed in that role because the Bucks have had Giannis all these years since 2013. But now I think Giannis will have to lean on Chris Middleton, and that's why he's going to win NBA Finals MVP. And I think the Bucks are going to win in Game 7. And honestly, guys, whether the Bucks win or the Suns win, I think this is going to be a classic series.
I love your pick of Chris Middleton. I can't remember how long or this streak has been going on, but I'm pretty sure the last maybe, I want to say like 6 or 7 NBA Finals MVPs have come from the small forward position. So Chris Middleton, I mean, he could be right there, you know, amongst the LeBron James, the Kawhi Leonards, the Kevin Durants of the world. So we'll see what happens. But I love that pick. Chris Middleton, he needs some – you need to put some respect on that man's name because he's been balling out this postseason.
Absolutely. Chris Middleton, and I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time, but Chris Middleton, I think if he shows out in the finals, I think now people might start having a conversation as him being a top 20 NBA player, because he has the skill to do it. It's just, can he package it in a consistent form? That's to be determined.
I mean, absolutely. I think, honestly, it's already fair to start putting Middleton in that discussion. I mean, he's an absolutely outstanding talent. I mean, and, you know, like you said, it's just sort of the consistency factor with him, with that. We see him play at, I mean, absolute superstar heights. And sometimes, you know, he has a bit of low stretches. But, I mean, I think, like you said, Michael, I mean, him being in the NBA Finals on the worldwide stage, I mean, people are going to get to know the name Chris Middleton. I really, truly believe that, regardless of the outcome of this series, if the Bucks win or not. I mean, Chris Middleton is going to get launched into that superstardom. That's my personal prediction. But we thank you again so much, Michael. I mean, your Bucks knowledge is unmatched here. I mean, nobody on this WSU sports staff comes close in terms of the Bucks to you.
Well,
Thank you so much for the analysis, and good luck to your Bucks as they go on this NBA Finals run, and hopefully they can bring home the Larry O'Brien.
all right, boys. Take care.
Take it easy.
Thank you, Michael.
That was Michael Daly, our Bucks beat reporter. I'm getting ahead of myself because our Suns beat reporter is now going to be coming on next to preview the Bucks opponent, the Suns. I already said that. It's Ben Harris, the man, the myth, the legend. He's here to break down everything you need to know about the team out in Arizona. Ben, first things first, how are you doing on this fine evening?
Joe, I'm fantastic. And Jory, John, I'm just excited to be here talking excellent playoff basketball with the three of you gentlemen. Michael Daly, great job covering the Bucks. And I think I have some things to say about the Suns that Michael Daly won't really approve of. So I'm ready to get going.
Love to hear it, Ben. Thank you for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. And I'll lead off again, just like I did with Michael, and kind of ask a similar question. Obviously with the Bucks, Giannis was, you know, their biggest star, and he went down with injury. And I asked him who was going to be the biggest, you know, supporting cast member besides Giannis to step up for the Bucks. Now I ask you for the Suns. So obviously the Suns dynamic is a little bit different. They're a very young team. No one really expected them to make it this far. Everyone knew Chris Paul was like a mini Salvation Army, but I don't think anyone predicted him to lead him to a finals. So I'm just going to ask you this question. So you have Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and even more that you can think of. Out of all the players on the Suns, who do you think has to step up the most in order for the Suns to win the NBA championship?
For the Suns to come out of this series victorious, I think this all has to lie on the shoulders of Devin Booker. Devin Booker has played fantastic throughout these playoffs, averaging 27 a game, almost 5 assists, about 6.5 rebounds on fantastic shooting splits. I mean, 44, 34.4, and almost 92% from the line. For a guy who shoots at the caliber he does, as well as the amount of shooting that he does, just purely from his position as the two guard within that offense, is just fantastic numbers. And I think Devin Booker, being the absolute offensive threat that he is, being able to lead this team to the finals, and now that they're here, he needs to succeed to the best of his abilities for them to bring home that Larry O'Brien.
I mean, I agree with Ben. I mean, I think it's been awesome watching him thrive during this postseason. And I feel like in the early stages of his career, I don't think anyone really questioned whether or not he was talented, but a lot of people question whether or not he could be a top option on a playoff contender. And I think he silenced all of those doubters during this postseason, obviously making it all the way to the NBA Finals in his first playoff run of his career.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really been exceptional watching him. He's averaging 27 points, 6.4 rebounds, 4.8 assists per game in the playoffs. And the whole supporting cast of the Suns around Chris Paul is just full of young guys. DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, even Cameron Payne. Like the whole supporting cast is just full of these, young guns, and they're just ready to go. And I love the chemistry this team has. It's just so much fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the name just there, Jory, and Michael Daly talked about him a lot too, a little bit in regards from the Bucks perspective, and that's Cameron Payne. He plays sort of a real nice compliment to Chris Paul, as sort of Daly said. Coming off the bench, where you don't really get a break from the point guard position, going from Chris Paul to Cameron Payne, and his stats so far in the playoffs: 10.1 points per game, 3.8 assists. They're not mind blowing, but I mean, he's been playing some pretty great basketball for the Suns. And so I want to ask you, because Cameron Payne is not a guy that, people typically think of as like a huge impact sort of performer. And, he's been kind of labeled as sort of a bust and, was thought of as kind of just, not a great player when he was in Chicago, when he was in OKC. But he's really stepped up, I mean, more than enough this year for the Suns. What have you seen from him that, has been so impactful with the rest of the Suns roster in terms of how he's been playing?
Cameron Payne has been able to take advantage of the opportunities given to him. I mean, at one point he was out of the league playing overseas until Monty Williams called him up and really helped resurrect his career as a bench guy here in Phoenix. Being able to come in this Clippers series in the Western Conference Finals and drop 29 on a night that Chris Paul is sidelined by COVID-19 is absolutely unbelievable and just a historic playoff performance. And I think it's going to go down as one that's remembered by Suns fans for a long time when they look back on this playoff run. I mean, this is a playoff run that's unprecedented for this franchise. The Suns have only been in the finals in 1976 and 1993, haven't won a title either time. And the last time they were even in the playoffs was over a decade ago in the 2009-2010 season. And then ending last season as bubble darlings, going 8-0 at Disney, just brings this Suns team to a point where now that they're in the finals, their fans are looking at every single piece that has brought them to this point. And Cameron Payne being able to come off the bench and provide awesome minutes from that backup point guard position has just made him, one, a fan favorite, and two, just made him a recognizable player during an unbelievable run as a team.
Yeah, like you said, Ben, I think the playoffs and even obviously the NBA Finals are the best time for even a more unknown player to really come out of the woodwork and make a name for himself. And usually even some players could get bigger contracts in the offseason if they're able to put on a show in the NBA playoffs and just getting, the national media attention, the respective fan base attention, I think is always a big thing. And Cameron Payne certainly did that when Chris Paul was sidelined. And my next question to you actually is perfect, and it actually involves Chris Paul. And it's kind of a two-parter, but it's like a double-sided question. So obviously Chris Paul, he's 36, 16 seasons in the league, and this could be it for him. This could be his last chance to finally win a title. And this is also kind of a little bit loaded, so take your time with this answer. So let's just go, if the Suns win and if they don't win, just go both sides of it. What happens to Chris Paul's legacy as an NBA point guard and for his Hall of Fame career? Like, if the Suns are able to win, what does it do to his legacy? And if the Suns are not able to beat the Bucks and win the championship, what does that do to his legacy? You know, when we look back at Chris Paul's career in maybe 10 years or so.
Chris Paul has one of the most interesting progressions as a player out of anyone I can think of in recent memory. Having had this historic career where he's been a all-time great point guard, ring or no ring, and finally this late into his career get his first shot at the finals is one almost unheard of for a player of his caliber. I mean, I don't think there's many people you can ask that wouldn't consider him to be a top 5 player at his position all time. And to, like you said, in his 16th year reach the finals for the first time is just an awesome opportunity to add on to his legacy. I don't think it should be held against Chris Paul in any way, shape, or form if the Suns are unable to top the Bucks and come out as champions. However, I definitely think that adding a ring to the resume would cement his place in history. Bringing him into that upper echelon, in my opinion, it would move him to the 3rd best point guard of all time. However, I think ring or no ring, Chris Paul has had a storied career and has revolutionized the point guard position and been an absolutely unbelievable influence on guys who there's this narrative around smaller point guards across basketball at all levels where it's just facts that they have to work harder to stay on the court and impress people more than like a 6'9" natural athlete kind of guy does. Chris Paul has put in the work every single day for over 20 years of his life, trying to be the best basketball player he can be. And he's absolutely going to go down in history as one of the greatest point guards of all time. And being able to kind of resurrect himself from being sent to OKC, kind of to have his career die in a trade this offseason where the Suns moved Kelly Oubre, Ricky Rubio, Ty Jerome, Jalen Leck, and a 2022 first rounder to OKC for CP3 and Abdul Nader to luckily OKC having him put in a little bit of influence in where he would end up. So he got to select that he would come to this Suns team, which already had a nice established young core in Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And he's played for Monty Williams when he was a Hornet. And just to be able to see him reach this pinnacle this late in his career when just about everyone had counted him out, it's really incredible. And I think win or lose in this final, CP3 has left his mark on the game of basketball. However, adding a ring would just mean so much to him, his fans, his family, and everyone who's watched his long storied career at the point guard position.
I mean, on the topic of Chris Paul, I'm like, this has been a really historic series from him. He's in closeout games this postseason. So, games where the Suns would eventually advance to the next round, that being so game 6 against the Lakers, game 4 against the Nuggets, and then again, game 6 against the Clippers. He's averaging 28.7 points and 9 assists while shooting 62% from the field. He's wildly efficient, and he's basically playing like he's in his prime when the pressure is at the highest. And, like a lot of great point guards get praised for having poise, in those stressful moments. But I feel like what the Chris Paul effect is that it just rubs off on everyone else on the team. And you kind of see that with the Suns. As young as this team is, the fact that they look so mature in those stressful moments is really remarkable. But I did see one pretty insane statistic about Chris Paul. As I mentioned, he plays so well in these closeout games this postseason. In game 6 of the Western Conference Finals, he scored 41 points and had 0 turnovers in that game. That's only happened 3 times in a conference finals series in NBA history. Hakeem Olajuwon in 1995, Michael Jordan in 1998, and Shaquille O'Neal in 2000. And what those 3 players have in common is that they all would eventually go on to win a championship and finals MVP. So I think that definitely bodes well for Chris Paul and the Phoenix Suns moving forward.
Pretty good company to be in right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. To be included, I mean, like you said, with the whole legacy thing, I mean, the fact that, if you don't have Chris Paul as like one of the best point guards of all time and top five, even top three, I can absolutely see the argument. I mean, when he's putting up stat lines and games and performances that are being thrown around with the likes of, Michael Jordan and Akeem and Shaq, it's not like that graphic that was on that TV broadcast one time where they lumped like Thaddeus Young into some cherry pick statistic thing with like LeBron and Hakeem and all them. Like, no, Chris Paul is legit. And I mean, like you said, winning a ring this year, I mean, absolutely cements his legacy. And again, too, like, I mean, I'm personally not one for all this, like a lot of like, legacy talk and like, oh, this destroys his, legacy and blah, blah, blah. Like, regardless of what happens, you said it, man. I mean, Chris Paul is phenomenal. And if he lose, how are you going to be able to blame Chris Paul if the Suns lose this series, to see what he's done coming in, taking a team that was not even in the playoffs last year, even though they were kind of solid. He dragged them up to a 2 seed all the way to the NBA Finals. It's an all-time run for the Suns, regardless of the impact, regardless of the outcome, of this upcoming Finals series. And transitioning into that, I want to again, sort of look towards this upcoming series and how they match up against the Bucks, the Suns. And I want to hear from you, Ben. What do you think is the prime thing that the Suns have to do to shut down this Bucks team, especially if Giannis comes back and is playing like Giannis Antetokounmpo?
Right. Giannis's health is certainly a massive factor on how this series is going to come out. I mean, I don't think there's anyone from us to professional analysts to members of either of these teams that really know what the story is going to be with Giannis throughout these potential 7 games. So Giannis definitely throws a wrench into things in his presence as a whole. However, what the Suns need to focus on during this series is doing what they do best, which is playing transition basketball. In transition this postseason, the Phoenix Suns are averaging 1.28 points per possession and shooting 58% on transition field goals. That points per possession number is huge when you're factoring in how many times they're running up and down the floor, getting good numbers, especially with the size disadvantage and speed advantage that the Phoenix Suns do have. They're in the 93rd percentile in the playoffs of transition efficiency in their offense, and they're shooting a whopping 67.6 rating for their efficient field goal percentage, which effective field goal percentage, which I can tell you is kind of a glance at how your team is having more success from the field than their opponent. It's factoring in numbers like your field goal attempts versus your free throw attempts and your free throw percentage versus your other teams. I won't get into the deep analytics. I am a big analytics guy. However, their transition offense is just it's a beautiful thing to watch, and it's absolutely fantastic. So I think if they can use the speed advantage they have, especially if Giannis is off the court and not able to take up all that length as well as provide the athleticism that he does in all factors of Giannis's incredible game, I think their transition offense is going to be a huge key to this, as well as their defense. Monty Williams has manufactured a defense for this team that really works. It reminds me a lot of Nick Nurse's championship Raptors team defense, where they kind of shrink the floor, they play great help defense, collapsing from the perimeter, and still have the athleticism in their wings and their backcourt to be able to recover out to perimeter shooters when they have to. But they do a really good job, despite their size, on limiting stuff in the paint. Just by playing fantastic collapsing team defense.
Yeah, Ben, you couldn't have said any better, especially with just the defensive part of it. That okay, everyone knew that the Bucks were a very good defensive team when you add like a PJ Tucker, just having so many long athletic wing players to really be able to clamp down opposing offenses, and the Suns as well, who we weren't expecting to have that good of a defensive team. But again, like Mikal Bridges, just players, and Jay Crowder that are able to step up and be able to guard your best players. And I actually found a stat for you. the Bucks and the Suns ranked first and second in defense efficiency throughout the entire playoffs, which is, I think, a true testament of what these two teams will bring to the table, of how tight this series will be. And again, it's going to come down to players like Chris Middleton and Devin Booker of who's going to have the better all-star kind of night. And my question to you real quick, Ben, was one of my last ones. I know we're not in school anymore, but I'm going to give you a multiple choice question. So I'm a big matchup guy. I like comparing two teams and just seeing what of the two players bring offensively and defensively. And there's kind of three that I'm kind of circling. And I'm not even include Giannis in this because depending if he's not even show up for game one, what we will see in game one. You're going to have Chris Paul and Drew Holiday be matched up, Devin Booker and most likely Chris Middleton, and DeAndre Ayton and Brook Lopez. And I think there's so much to talk about for all three of these matchups, but I just want to hear your opinion on a little bit of each and just which one you think is most important for either team to come out on top.
That's really interesting, especially when you consider the impact that Chris Middleton has played for that Milwaukee team, where they kind of have to ride or die by his point production. I mean, on nights where he's able to be consistent and drop 30 plus points on efficient 3-point shooting, the Bucks are a totally different team offensively than when he's not hot and scoring under 20 and in the mid-teens. Like you saw in this past closeout game for Milwaukee, both Chris Middleton scored, I think, like over 30 points, and Drew Holiday scored in the late 20s. And you saw how dominant they were able to come out in that final game against the Hawks as a offensive duo. So you're absolutely right in the terms of how important those players are to Milwaukee's offense. But as for an individual matchup, I think Devin Booker versus Chris Middleton is going to be absolutely instrumental. I think, like I said earlier, Devin Booker to me is my key to this series. I need him to be able to play fantastic both on and off the ball. Allow Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton to run that pick and roll to perfection, which I think, first off, Paul and Ayton is maybe the best pick and roll duo we've seen in some time. And by being able to play off of them like Devin Booker can and be such a catch and shoot threat, as well as being able to put the ball on the floor and distribute to his teammates just as well as any other all-star in the league, I think that matchup is going to be key because Devin Booker is such an effective offensive player. He's shooting 56.6% true shooting in the playoffs, which is just unheard of for a guy who shoots at the capacity he does. So for Devin Booker to beat the all-star level defense of Chris Middleton night in, night out, I think that's going to be the key there. Being able to outplay Chris Middleton's stellar defense from Devin Booker's side of things is going to be a massive factor of this series.
Well, Ben, we're going to start to wrap up a little bit in regards to the Suns talk, but before you go, we got to ask you, we asked Michael Daly, we're going to be giving our predictions later tonight. What do you think is going to happen in this series? Who's going to win? I mean, how many games, if you want to throw that in there? And who do you think is going to wind up being the finals MVP?
Well, talking odds, the Suns are currently minus 175 favorites to win the series and 5.5 point favorites to come out on top game one. However, I think those are pretty accurate. I think the Suns are going to come out on top of this series. They've only lost, I think, 4 games this entire playoffs, and they've had pieces missing at times and a lot of injuries to deal through, whether it be Chris Paul being hurt or out with COVID. Devin Booker had his nose broken. Different guys have had to step up in different times. And that's why I think the fantastic depth of this Suns team, as well as just how they've been playing all season and all postseason. You see how efficient they are on both sides of the ball, having a ton of guys who can come in and fill up the cup, whether it be Torrey Craig, Cameron Payne, and a ton of other guys on their bench that have been able to contribute to the best of their ability. I mean, there's so many guys on this team that can play a big role. Mikal Bridges can do it from in or outside. Jay Crowder is a fantastic veteran and defensive stopper. Cameron Johnson, who everybody hated that pick when it happens, has been playing great playoff minutes, especially on the defensive end against bigger guys. So I think the depth of this Suns team is going to help push them over the top, as well as the fantastic veteran leadership we've seen from Chris Paul and the superstars. And I mean true superstars that Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton have become. I haven't talked much about DeAndre Ayton real quick before I get to my series prediction. DeAndre Ayton has played fantastic basketball this entire playoffs. He's had 11 of these 16 playoff games where he's had 10 or more rebounds, a lot of them in the mid-late teens. And being able to do that, as well as average over 15 points a night, be a perfect complement to Chris Paul, and be getting so many offensive rebounds, gaining them so many second chances. I've loved the way DeAndre Ayton's been able to play. So between their big three there in Phoenix and the depth and off the bench production that they've been able to provide, I can't see this series going any more than 6 games. I think Phoenix is able to take it home in either 5 or 6 games. Like a lot of how the narrative of this series will go depends on Giannis Antetokounmpo's health. However, I don't see any situation where the Phoenix Suns don't come out on top. I mean, second place in Western Conference regular season, have dominated the playoffs, only losing 4 games, and they've done it against fantastic teams. They beat the defending champs round 1. Then they came out, did it against a very solid team in the Denver Nuggets that had as our current MVP, Nikola Jokic, and then went out against the Clippers team. While, yes, you can argue all 3 of these teams have been banged up in some way or another. Have you watched the NBA this season? That's kind of the story of everybody. That's what everyone's got going on. So this series is going to come down to who's healthy and who's been consistently great. The Suns have been great on both sides of the ball, as you said, second behind actually the Bucks in team defensive rating in the playoffs, as well as just having so many guys who can fill up the cup on offense. I think the Phoenix Suns are taking this series, and I think there's no way, no matter Devin Booker could average 40 a night, and if they win the finals, Chris Paul is getting the finals MVP due to nothing other than how much he's meant to this association as a whole over these past nearly 2 decades. I mean, Chris Paul is going to win finals MVP if the Phoenix Suns come out on top and get the Larry O'Brien point blank period.
Well, Ben, I mean, just absolutely killer analysis. I mean, I know for me, absolutely prepped and know everything I need to know about the Suns now. Thank you so much. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Michael Daly was on the other end. He picked the Bucks to win in 7. So we'll see which one of our 2 analysts, Suns versus Bucks, comes out on top. Thank you so much again, Ben, for being here tonight. Just I've said it for like the 3rd or 4th time or 5th time. I don't know. But killer analysis. I mean, absolutely great. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great night, Ben.
Thank you, all 3 of you gentlemen. I couldn't have done it without y'all. And shout outs to WSOU alums Jose Balderrama and Twitter verified man Justin Morris for being the 2 biggest Suns fans I know. I'm rooting for your Suns. I'm supporting y'all. And let's see where this series takes us, man. I'm excited to watch the finals, and even more excited to see how the 3 of y'all wrap this show up. So thank you to you 3. I will talk to y'all later.
Thanks,
so
Ben.
much.
And that was Ben Harris, our Suns beat reporter. And now it's time for us 3 to give sort of our analysis, our predictions in regards to this upcoming NBA Finals. And so, I mean, I'm just going to jump right into it. I'll go to you first, Jory. I mean, what do you think looking at both teams, who do you think is going to come out on top, and what do you think is going to be the key thing that's going to make that team win?
It's so tough because, you know, I mentioned at the top of the show, like a Bucks Nets, you know, whoever comes out in that series, I thought was really going to win it all. But the way the Suns have been performing, and Ben kind of mentioned this, like they have obviously faced some hampered teams, but I feel like that shouldn't take away from what they have achieved this postseason. They have been phenomenal in every series, both offensively and defensively. But I feel like I would be kind of I can't pick against the Bucks. I just can't do it. And with this whole Giannis situation, it's tough, and that could come back to bite me in the butt. But I just feel like the Bucks are just right now riding high, coming off that Atlanta Hawks series. You know, all of their supporting players, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, Brooke Lopez, Bobby Portis, have all been playing exceptionally well. Yes, I mean Chris Paul is going to get his, Devin Booker is going to get his, and you know Ben mentioned DeAndre Ayton. He's been a revelation in this postseason. I mean, it's going to be a very back and forth series. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 7 games, but I just feel like the Bucks, they have the best player in the series in Giannis. As good as Chris Paul has been, it's hard to argue that Giannis isn't the best player, unless he's not 100%. That's still to be decided, but I just feel like the Bucks are going to come out on top.
Yeah, I love everything you said, Joy, because there's just so many factors going into this NBA Finals series compared to previous years that we're not really accustomed to, obviously with the injuries. And it's such a difficult question just with Giannis alone. If Giannis was, if we knew if he was 80% healthy, 90% healthy, is he going to miss 3 games or 4 games? And for me personally, I've been big on the Bucks throughout the regular season and the last couple of years. I thought they were always a very good team. And it only took, I think it would only take 1 or 2 playoff runs by like a Chris Middleton to really step up and to show that, okay, Giannis is one of the best players in the world. But he is like, I know they do this analogy, but he's the Batman and they need a Robin. And I think Chris Middleton's finally shown that. And Ben gave such a good argument for the Suns. And I've always had the Bucks as my gut team the last couple of days. And I think even though even Monty Williams is obviously a better coach probably than Mike Budenholzer, but I also have to agree. I think the Bucks will come out on top. It's just that kind of year for them. I think that if you're able to, especially in round 1, I knew they were for real. If you're able to beat a team that embarrassed you last year in the playoffs and get revenge, on that Miami Heat team that some are calling frauds, like bubble frauds or whatever the term is, I think that was such a good start for them. And that's when you knew that they were going to be a legit contender. And obviously, no one could have forecast the Nets getting hurt. But there's so many pieces to the Bucks that we barely even uttered a word about. I mean, talk about Brooke Lopez, who I know Joe was probably so painful to watch as a, play for the Nets all those years. And I remember him being just a big guy who could not shoot and just was so dominant, and good inside. And now he's basically a stretch big. And he's had some games in this playoff run, especially against the Nets, blocking, Kevin Durant or, I think one game, I forgot how many dunks he had. He just had some insane stats. And obviously DeAndre Ayton, who's been one of the best Suns players, he's been matched up against Andre Drummond, not a great defensive center. Zubac on the Clippers, not the best defensive center. And it's just, I think this is going to be his biggest test because Brooke Lopez is a veteran. And again, Brooke Lopez is having such a good playoff run. Again, there's a couple of Bucks like him are having just one of those types of runs. And obviously both teams are scorching hot. But I think Giannis is the type of player where unless he can't walk, he is such a fierce competitor. If he doesn't play at least, let's say it goes 6 or 7, he doesn't play 5 or 6 of the games in this series, he'll regret it for the rest of his life. So I think that at most he'll miss game 1, barring something unforeseen. And I think the Bucks will win. I think they will win in 6. I think it'll be very close. I know both games this series, the Suns won 2-0. And I'm also a big believer if whatever team wins in the regular season, usually the opposite team comes out on top when it comes down to the most important matchup of it. And I know that doesn't happen all the time, but I am a big believer in that. And I think the Bucks have learned from those losses. And I know Giannis put up big games and they lost, but you have one more shot here and there. Let's say that Devin Booker doesn't hit, or if Chris Middleton hits in the regular season that he's been doing in the playoffs, those games could have been different. And I think the Bucks will come out on top. And I obviously want Chris Paul to win a championship. He's deserved it. He's probably the most deserving player in the NBA right now that deserves a championship. But I just think that just the way the Bucks roster is made up and the way things have been going, that they're going to come out on top.
Yeah, and I think heading into this series, the thing that I guess I'm sort of anticipating is the right word, and it also plays into the reason why I think it's so hard to sort of predict how this is going to go. I feel like the Suns and Bucks, these teams match up against each other so well. Where, I mean, you just looking flat out at the roster, I mean, they both get excellent point guard play. The Bucks in Drew Holiday, the Suns in Chris Paul. both teams have absolute lights out scorers who are sort of, can be classified as, Kobe descendants in that sort of mold. And Devin Booker on the Suns, Chris Middleton on the Bucks. You've got Giannis, obviously, a absolute force down low, but DeAndre Ayton is playing like one of the best centers in the entire league right now down low throughout this playoff run. You've got Jay Crowder and PJ Tucker on either side, who are excellent power forwards and, are just great glue guy pieces on both teams. It's really hard for me to sort of see and try and find an edge that one team has over the other that's going to really kick them ahead and get them to, win a title and bring home the trophy. And I mean, for that reason alone, I think this series, regardless of who wins, is going to go 7 games. I mean, I think it was Daly said it before that, regardless of, who wins, that this is going to be an instant classic series. And I really truly believe that, because I mean, there's a lot of talk that, we haven't had a lot of parity in the NBA recently, blah, 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 with, the super teams. The Warriors had their dominant run. The Heels had their dominant run. I really feel like, this is one of the most just balanced and, could go any way NBA finals we've had in a really, really long time. So it is really tough for me to sort of pinpoint a winner or something, but I do think that, I said it's tough for me to find an edge, but I think there is just the slightest one that's going to tip this team over the proverbial cliff into winning a NBA title, and it's the Suns and their guard play. And I just trust Chris Paul more than I do Drew Holiday. I mean, Drew Holiday, a fantastic player, an absolute, just monster on the defensive end. But Chris Paul, he's been around, and like, yes, he hasn't been to the NBA finals and doesn't have that sort of experience, but he's a vet. He, like you said, Dre, I mean, in, clinching games, he steps up huge and he puts up monster stat lines. He had 40 some odd points in that game to clinch against the Clippers. I trust Chris Paul when the lights are on brightest to really just step up and lead the Suns team. And like, maybe he won't have the most eye-popping stats, and, he might stick around at, 16, 17. I mean, he's averaging 18 points per game on the playoffs, 8 assists. That's not like you look at his stat sheet and you're absolutely blown away. But he does so much that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. And I think that's just going to be the edge for the Suns in this series. And, combine that with the fact that, both teams, they have such deep rosters, and, you have Devin Booker, who's going to average 30 points per game regardless in this playoffs. DeAndre Ayton is going to go up against Brook Lopez, against Giannis. That's another thing too, is the Giannis health factor. Regardless, it's just a tough thing for me to predict. And I do honestly think, like I think there's no way Giannis misses more than, one game, even if he's not full strength. I think he's gonna, as long as Giannis thinks he can be out there, he's going to be out there. So with all that said, I mean, as close as these two teams are, I think just the extra, sort of star power, locker room leadership, whatever you want to call it, of Chris Paul, I think he's just going to get this Suns team over the hump and help them take down the Bucks. And so that's my personal pick for this series. I've got Suns over Bucks in 7. But I do want to talk about Giannis again and the health. We sort of brought up a lot throughout this entire show. And I kind of want to just pose sort of a theoretical question for you. That is, do you see any universe where, maybe Giannis just simply can't get healthy and, he really misses time? Do you think the Bucks can still take this series if Giannis either doesn't play or if he is not at full strength for any of it?
Wow, that's a good question, Joe. Again, like, I think we've all agreed that realistically, we think that Giannis would miss a game or two. But I really like this theoretical possibility because anything is possible, like we've seen throughout this entire playoffs. Someone on either team, I don't want to jinx it, but could get hurt too throughout this series. Like, it's happened every series. So we really do not know. But if Giannis let's say Giannis misses 3 or 4 games of the series, I think the Suns might be able to take it. I know, like I said that the Bucks have the pieces, obviously. They have the supporting cast, but the supporting cast works so well when Giannis is still on the floor, just because, okay, Giannis, like, I'm not going to say a distraction, but if Chris Middleton has, the run he's been having along with Drew Holiday and Giannis is on the floor, that's 3 options. you take out Giannis from that equation. All right, you still have Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton. Obviously did against the Hawks, which again was a very, they were a very turnover prone team, very young team. And, Trae Young was, middling. But you're running against, again, the Phoenix Suns, who I think are just a phenomenal team as well. And again, the defense, again, the Bucks are number one, Suns are number two in defensive efficiency. The Suns being able to potentially clamp down Middleton and Holiday for a couple of games. I think that definitely will have a big factor in it. I could be wrong, but I'm like this close to picking the Suns to begin with. And any other reason I will, just because of the way that they've had also that type of run. And I guess I'm almost going to say like the basketball gods looking down on Chris Paul at this point in his career. I think it would just be like almost like a divine justice kind of thing in the way he's been playing. And, he overcame COVID and all that. But if Giannis does not play, let's say 4 games in the series, I think the Suns would have a good chance of winning and be able to take care of business with the remaining players on the Bucks on the floor.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point, though, Jonathan, about just kind of already being at that level where I feel like I'm picking with my heart instead of my mind in this series. Like, I don't know if I really, really believe the Bucks can even win this series at the moment. And if Giannis is not out there or not at 100%, then I think the Suns could win this series as, in 5 games. I mean, it's just so that's the biggest factor, I think, in this entire series more than anything else. So, I mean, it's so tough to say, but yeah, I don't think the Bucks would be able to compete with this team without Giannis. I mean, he just adds so much. I feel like if he's not 100%, I don't know how you can really have him out there because he's not a threat as a shooter. You can't just have him, kind of spacing the floor. I feel like a lot of his points come in transition and at the rim, attacking downhill. And if his knee is not 100%, that might limit his mobility. It might be harder for him to just operate both on the offensive and defensive side of the floor. So it's going to be – that's the biggest question. But I feel like they might just be hiding it. He might be perfectly fine. We don't know. He could be perfectly fine. I believe he was supposed to play in a potential Game 7 against the Hawks, had that series gone 7 games. So the Bucks believe that he would have been healthy enough to play, and an extra day might – help that knee recover even more. So we'll see. But again, that's a great question though, Joe.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely do agree with you. And I mean, I'm picking the Suns regardless, I think really, to beat this Bucks team. And if Giannis wasn't playing, that's just an extra, couple of things that makes that decision easier. I will say, I think that the Bucks, me personally, I think that the Bucks will be able to survive a little bit if Giannis doesn't come out of the gate fully healthy. If he misses a game or two, fingers crossed that he doesn't, because we want to see both these teams out here full strength from the get-go. But I think the Bucks do have the pieces. If Brook Lopez steps up, if Bobby Portis, starts playing really great again, I think they have the pieces on this team to. Without Giannis, they could steal a game or two, but I think to go a full series without Giannis, it's really just going to be too crippling for them. And, that's, again, it's just a testament to this Bucks depth that, even if Giannis misses game 1, I could still see a world where they take down the Suns in that game 1 because Chris Middleton has the ability to go off for 40 points, because Drew Holiday is an all-star level guard who can just, really facilitate an offense really well and shut down guys on the defensive end. So, it's such a series of hypotheticals and, really just uncertainty. And I mean, in my mind, that makes it more fun as a fan and, as a viewer, because I mean, it really can go absolutely either way. We're used to the finals where it's, the Warriors are probably going to win in, 5 or 6 games. Maybe, LeBron can just, get possessed for a couple of games and take them to 7 and maybe, take it out. But we're back to, sort of just flat out, we have no idea who's going to win it. It's anybody's game. Whoever is going to just step up the biggest is going to take home this title. And tying into that, I want to kind of stray away a little bit from, we've talked about Giannis, we've talked about Chris Middleton and Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, etc., Drew Holiday. But from either side, from the Bucks and the Suns, who do you think outside of, the big stars, is sort of a lower bench guy, a role player guy, who do you think you could see stepping up and playing a really huge key impact in this series?
That's another good question, Joe. Before we started our show, I made a thing where I just listed every player on each team and then just their points per game average. And I know that's not the best way to look at, again, who's contributing the most for each team, because the intangibles that Chris Paul brings behind the scoring average isn't going to say like, all right, Devin Booker is necessarily better than Chris Paul just because he scores more. It's not fair to say. But I just think, well, I guess like the question is out of both teams. I think a big player that can really steal this series, we'll go for it's going to be for the Suns, is going to be Cameron Payne. Because, okay, if Drew Holiday is able to stifle Chris Paul at any point, and obviously him and Devin Booker, last series against the Clippers were stopped at certain points, they're going to need some more scoring, especially off the bench. And then that's kind of like a storyline that's not as talked about as much, is bench scoring in these big postseason runs. And I always go back to, let's say, the Miami Heat days with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. But they also had some great scorers coming off the bench that, could hit shots when it mattered and just things along that realm. A good backup point guard and stuff like that. And Cameron Payne has shown in that, in previous series that he is that guy. And again, only averaging 10 points a game, that doesn't really show what he's brought to the table for the Suns team, becoming a fan favorite. And I know that's going to be a popular choice for a lot of people. But again, when you look at the makeups of these two rosters, again, the Bucks, it could have helped if Dante Di Vincenzo didn't go down with injury. And they obviously have some big players coming off the bench. Again, I love Bobby Portis and the development of his game, seeing an ex-Knick play well. But I just think Cameron Payne is going to be such a key catalyst if the Suns are going to steal the series, just because, okay, if Chris Paul, obviously I'll go with you, Joy, with your article that I added the other day, Father Time, if that ever is prevalent at any point in the series, having a backup point guard who can score efficiently and just, put up quality minutes and be almost like an Energizer bunny for a team, I think is priceless. And I think it could be definitely a key for the Suns if they end up winning the series as a whole.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I mean, Cameron Payne, that's a great pick. But I feel like if you're going Phoenix Suns, I'll probably talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, PJ Tucker, I feel like that's definitely going to be a player that's got to step up in this series. You have obviously we have the aforementioned stars in Giannis, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday. But I feel like, PJ Tucker, he's going to be able to make an impact defensively, and that's obviously what he's known for. But his ability to knock down key shots throughout the perimeter, that's going to be important. But I feel like, his effort on the defensive end, whether it be defending Devin Booker for periods of time, trying to slow down their bigs, because he can obviously bang with someone like DeAndre Ayton at times. I don't know if he'll be able to hang with Chris Paul. That'll be a tough matchup for him. But I feel like that's probably the one role player on Milwaukee that's definitely going to make an impact more than probably the rest of that roster.
Yeah, I definitely think PJ Tucker is the guy that's going to play like a straight up just pivotal role, especially, being the versatility he has on defense. He could realistically guard anybody on that Suns roster. If he can really step up and be a huge anchor on D, I mean, especially, if Giannis misses a game or two and, you don't have that impact that Giannis brings on the defensive end. I think PJ Tucker is a huge key. But there's another guy actually on the Bucks that I think would be my answer to this question, and someone who I really think can, maybe it might be a shocking thing to more casual fans to see this guy step up, but it's Bryn Forbes. Because I think Bryn Forbes, he's not the biggest name. He's averaging 7 points in the playoffs, and like you said, Jonathan, scoring isn't everything. He's not a huge, key pivotal part of this Bucks team, but the one thing that he can do is shoot. And the one thing more than anything is that he's one of those guys in the league, and there's not a lot of them. And it's probably not going to, it might only happen once out of 82 games in a season. But if you get him on that one right night, he's a guy who can just absolutely go off and single-handedly change the course of a game. In game 4, against the Heat to sweep the Heat, clinch the series in round one. He dropped 22 points and outscored Jimmy Butler on the Miami Heat, who, is the Miami superstar, a guy who carried them to the finals the previous season. In that game, he went 7 for 15 from the field, 7 for 14 from three. I mean, there's a very, very small list of guys in the entire NBA who can go on an absolutely, hot streak stretch like Bryn Forbes can, just in a matter of, mere minutes in terms of basketball. Chris Middleton is a guy who I think is like that too, I mentioned earlier, but I mean, having another guy like that in Bryn Forbes and, add in the fact that he is sort of more of a role player, not a very, well-known guy. He might not get a lot of attention from the Phoenix Suns. He's a guy who, Phoenix might say, all right, let's leave Bryn Forbes alone. We don't really have to, key in on shutting him down defensively because he's not a big part of this team. But if you leave Bryn Forbes open a couple of times and he starts getting his stroke down and, hits down 4 or 5 threes in a row, that's a 12, 15-point swing that can just, in a close game and in a close series like I think this is going to be, that can really just change the tide and momentum of the game. And, just in general, I mean, we know that shooting is never enough in this modern NBA. And to have a guy who's an elite three-point shooter like Bryn Forbes is so valuable to a team. And so I think he's a guy that really could, it might just be one game. He might just be a complete non-factor for, 5 or 6 games. But I think he really can have one game in this series where he hits 6 threes and, knocks down 18, 20 points and just plays a really key role in a Bucks victory.
Yeah, Joe, I really like your pick because I remember him, like, obviously with the Spurs and the way his career has been going, where sometimes when you look at the box score, you'll sometimes forget he plays. And I remember I've seen that before when I looked through some of the old Bucks box scores. And again, like you said, he's the type of that volume shooter. If you can get him going, he can, like you said, completely change the trajectory of a game and bring you that three-point presence. Because, I can already forecast it, and it's usually how it works. When you have, two teams that are younger, that are, a little bit inexperienced, there's going to be some nerves, I feel like, at least in games 1 and 2, I think, shooting the ball. And obviously the Bucks are a team that loves to shoot threes, and obviously the Suns do as well, but especially with the Bucks, I think they could get cold sometimes. And getting a player who is not fazed by that, by the bright stage that, every player, like we've talked about before, no one's won a championship, I believe, on either roster, and we only have like Jay Crowder, maybe one other player who's been even in the finals. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, I think, for at least a little bit. And obviously, Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton have disproved that throughout the entire playoff run. But the NBA Finals is a different animal. But I just think having a scorer off the bench, like comparing it almost to Cameron Payne. Well, Cameron Payne has to be more of a factor than Bryn Forbes in for either team to win, in my opinion. But just having a guy who could just purely just shoot the basketball and do it at will, I think is so invaluable. And again, Joy, I really loved your PJ Tucker pick because I will never forget, watching that Nets series and him just absolutely, ruffling the feathers of Kevin Durant. And I know, like, obviously Kevin Durant still scored his point totals, and he brought his game obviously to his KD level. But I will never forget him on the Rockets as well, just being that amazing defender who, again, can hit threes sometimes, at will, like when his shot is on. And having players like that on the Bucks who are going to have to show up in this series in order to win, him, Pat Connaughton, some other shooters here and there that are just there and are signed onto the Milwaukee Bucks roster to shoot the basketball and hit threes when it matters. I think it's going to be so important, and especially with PJ Tucker, if Devin Booker and Chris Paul, are able to really just continue to take over like they have, they're going to try – the Bucks, are going to try every single way to stop them. And they're going to try maybe a bunch of different combinations of defenders, and PJ Tucker will be up there. And don't be surprised if he ends up starting, a game here or there. If, he's the one to be able to lock down Devin Booker as the series progresses, I think is definitely plausible. But I think both of your guys' picks are definitely very, very, very excellent picks, and definitely crucial for either team to win.
And before we sort of wrap this show up, as we're getting towards the end, there is one more pick that we all have to make that, both of our analysts, Ben Harris and Michael Daly, have done. And that's this year's finals MVP. Honestly, I think a bigger question mark than most years, because there's, like we said, there's like a big three on each team that, any three guys between Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Giannis, and Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, any of those six guys could take over and just change the impact of this series. So it's a fun question to ask. I really feel like with how you guys have picked who you think is going to win the finals. Who do you see being the MVP for the respective teams that you picked?
Okay, I'll go if either team wins, like who would be the finals MVP? Because Michael brought that up earlier of just the fact that whoever wins, the championship will have a player from their team. The Bucks, I think it'll be Chris Middleton. I think if they are going to win the series, that he has to be, the superstar in the making. He's been trying to be throughout this playoff run. He's going to have to carry them at some point. If he doesn't carry them, the Suns will take advantage of that. And you think of an MVP as the most valuable player. And obviously, if Giannis was at full health, he could, win. I think he would obviously win probably the NBA Finals MVP if the Bucks are able to win. But again, we're anticipating that Giannis will not play game one or maybe be limited in game one and not really maybe reach himself again until maybe game three. So I think from the opening tip-off, Chris Middleton's got to be the best player on the floor for the Bucks in order for the Bucks to win. And on the Suns side, I really like what Ben said before, that I think potentially Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton could deserve it more, like just based on like their stats. But I just think the NBA will give it to Chris Paul just because of the career he's had, the experiences he's had, and finally reaching the mountaintop. And I think he will have a great series. He will not lead the team in scoring. Like that's my prediction. I think Devin Booker or DeAndre Ayton will. I think he'll bring so many things to the table that's just beyond the stat sheet, like he has time and time again. I'll never forget when he had COVID and he was in the protocols, when the Suns would FaceTime him after the game, and just you could see like the chemistry he's built with them. And I can't not remember before Chris Paul got there, the chemistry the Suns had. No one really knew about that. And then once Chris Paul gets there, you finally see everything out in the open, how close they are as a team. So I just feel like for a most valuable player, just you could say on and off the court, I think Chris Paul will be that. And I just think the NBA, just the way he's had the career he's had, I think at this point it would be almost a crime not to give it to him if the Suns win.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, if the Suns go on to win, I think it is Chris Paul that's going to take home finals MVP. I mean, he was getting MVP, most valuable player, consideration during the regular season. So I feel like people will think, oh, well, he didn't win that award, so here's the final MVP. But, I mean, I'm sure he's obviously going to perform at a level to where he actually does deserve it. But I feel like on the Bucks side of things, I feel like I don't know if it really can be Chris Middleton, because if Chris Middleton, as much as I love Chris Middleton, if he really is the Bucks' best player, I don't think they're going to win the series. So I think it pretty much has to kind of go to Giannis, just based on the fact that I don't know if Chris Middleton, as good as he can be, like he's going to need help. But I just feel like if Giannis is there and healthy, I feel like he's just going to outperform Middleton, and he'll probably be the biggest reason as to why the Bucks win. Not the only reason, but the biggest reason. And I feel like they'll probably end up giving it to Giannis if the Bucks go on to win. And Giannis is already the only player in NBA history with an MVP award, a Defensive Player of the Year award, and a Most Improved Player award. So now you could add potentially a championship ring and a Finals MVP to that, that trophy room of his. That would be something, a hell of a resume for him this early on into his career. But we'll see at the end of the series what that looks like.
It's going to be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's just the fact that, like you said, like Giannis, his resume, especially if he wins this finals and takes on the finals MVP, he could retire tomorrow going as a first ballot Hall of Famer. And the fact that he's still in his mid-20s and he's probably got another 10, maybe even 15 years of basketball ahead of him, it's absolutely ridiculous to think about him, like what he could potentially do and then what his resume might look like in the future when he really does retire. It's just awesome to think about. And I do think that, like you said, Dre, I completely agree with you, is that as much as I also love Chris Middleton, I think he's a fantastic player and he'll be a really vital piece of this Bucks, finals team. I do think that, like you said, if Chris Middleton really is the best player out there, I don't think they win. I think if Giannis plays and the Bucks win, I mean, it's gonna be Giannis as the Finals MVP because I mean, Giannis is a guy who I really think, regardless of whether they win, lose, if Giannis is out there and healthy, he's a lock for like at least 27 points per game, and he's gonna get double-digit rebounds, and he's just gonna be an absolute stat sheet stuffer. He's the absolute integral part of that Bucks team, and I mean, things are just gonna run through him. And so I really think, as much as it would be awesome to see Chris Middleton take home a Finals MVP, I just think it's a little bit too tough to win one when you have a guy like Giannis right next to you. And again, same thing on the Sun side, as sort of both you said and Ben brought it up, which is that there's really almost no way that Chris Paul doesn't get Finals MVP. I think if the Suns win, I mean, and you guys have already harkened the point home, so I won't really touch much more on that. But I do actually think, and this is like an absolute complete long shot, oddball thing, that like there's a slim universe where I could actually see DeAndre Ayton taking home a Finals MVP. And the reason that I'm basing it on is that we saw back in 2015, Andre Iguodala took home a Finals MVP, which is still kind of, looking back on it, like a puzzling pick to win a Finals MVP. But like a big thing about that was that, he sort of locked down LeBron in that Finals and played a huge, defensive role for that Warriors team. And I think if the Suns, take this series and like if DeAndre Ayton, if he gets put on Giannis and is sort of responsible for doing the bulk of guarding him, if he really like shuts Giannis down, and I could see maybe there's a universe where they reward that. Like if Giannis has a bad series and they say, oh well, look how much of an impact DeAndre Ayton had in the defensive end, and he's also probably going to put up double numbers. But I mean, that's like a 1 in 1,000 scenario. I mean, I think it's absolute lock. Chris Paul is going to take home the Finals MVP should the Suns win. So those are my 2 picks there.
Yeah, the thing with DeAndre Ayton, and I was nodding my head before because I was kind of thinking that as well. I almost on the same wavelength, just as the fact that, again, I'm going to say DeAndre Ayton hasn't been underrated this playoff run, but obviously the stardom has been on Booker and Chris Paul, the backcourt. But what DeAndre Ayton's brought to the table, and I think many people did not expect him to really be this player throughout the postseason. And, coming into this playoffs, we knew that Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, we would expect them to have growing pains. They're young. They haven't been in this situation at all their entire careers. And for them to play at the level that they're at, I think is certainly just incredible. Just DeAndre Ayton has been playing so well. And I can imagine if like he puts up really monster numbers and he's able to like almost, I'm going to say the word, abuse Brook Lopez, I think, like in the paint, if he's able to shut down Giannis, I think it's very plausible for it to happen. And I wish that we could make this same argument for Devin Booker. But I just feel like with DeAndre Ayton, just the fact that Giannis is just a bigger, part of the Bucks than some of the guards, like we said, compared to before. I just think DeAndre Ayton could also play a role in that. But I cannot imagine the backlash if the Suns win the NBA Finals and Chris Paul does not get the Finals MVP. I just can't even imagine what that would even be like. And I think like it just wouldn't do him justice. And I think just the fact with him, like I said before, like having COVID, like literally like a week or 2 ago, and then he comes back and obviously he's not going to play like himself. And I think in this series, he might not play like himself, but just the other stuff he brings to the table is so important. I think it's very, very possible. And one last point I'll make is just about Chris Middleton. I'm basing my Chris Middleton pick based off the fact that Giannis will not play or be very limited in the first 2 or 3 games of the series. And I just can't justify giving an MVP award to a player who doesn't play every game of the series. That's just my logic behind it. I know that's not usually the common logic, but just from my point of view, if Chris Middleton, and obviously he hasn't done this all the time, but if he somehow has maybe 25 points a game throughout the entire series plus, I just can't imagine. Obviously, if Giannis comes back and he gets his triple-double-esque numbers, for 4 or 5 games, let's say it goes to 7 and Chris Middleton balls out for 7 games, I just feel like it would be also a crime if he wouldn't get the MVP. And I think that'll be taken a lot into consideration. If Giannis isn't himself until later in the series, which we know if Giannis is himself, he will deliver, he will perform. But if Chris Middleton is more consistent throughout more games, I just think that it's very possible he could bring it home too.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. It's just, I think you just hit it right on the nail. That's exactly kind of my line of thinking too. But well, yeah, it's just I don't even know what else to say at this point. Really, we'll just have to wait and see how Giannis is feeling out there. And I mean, I would absolutely love to see Chris Middleton win a Finals MVP. I think that would just make the Twitter timeline go crazy. But I mean, we'll see. It seems kind of like a stretch, but again, I would love to see it.
Yeah, and shout out to our man Heaven Hill, the sports director here, because he is probably the absolute number one Chris Middleton fan in the entire world. And you don't follow him on Twitter and see his. I mean, he's just straight up live tweets Chris Middleton possessions sometimes, and it's so awesome to see. So it'll be really, really awesome to see Chris Middleton win a Finals MVP, just to see Hev's reaction alone. But I mean, like you said, Jory, we got to just wait and see when it comes to this series. And there's so much that, we tried our best, and I think we did an absolutely outstanding job patting ourselves on the back there. But it's hard to predict how this series is going to go. And like I said earlier, I think that's a good thing, and it's going to make for some really, really awesome entertainment. Awesome series is going to be coming up between the Bucks and the Suns. Hopefully we got you covered with everything that you need to know. I know Michael Daly and Ben Harris, huge shout outs to them, because they both gave absolutely awesome in-depth analysis on both sides. Daly for the Bucks, Ben Harris for the Suns. So shout out to them. Shout out again to Heaven Hill, the number one Chris Middleton fan, for being an absolutely outstanding sports director here, helping orchestrate this whole thing. And Jonathan and Jory, you two, the co-hosts for tonight, thank you to you guys. I mean, instrumental parts to this show. Couldn't have done it without you. You guys, absolutely outstanding.
No, thank you, Joy. I appreciate it. But I think on behalf of me and Jory, we have to just thank you for your outstanding lead host duties. I can never get over the fact or the way you sometimes will transition between questions. It's like really listening to like a debate moderator sometimes, of how just like flawless it just seems. But you did a great job, and I know on behalf of, I know Jory will say it too, but we love doing it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just harping off what Jonathan says. Thank you for having me, Joe. Appreciate it. It's a fun show, and I'm even more excited to see what happens in Game 1 on Tuesday.
Well, yeah, be sure to tune in. Tomorrow's Tuesday, actually. The week's creeping up on me. Time's flying by. It was already the 4th of July yesterday. I mean, we're living in a wacky sort of time bending world right now. But thank you so much for watching. We hope we got you absolutely all prepared. Be sure to tune in tomorrow to Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully